Should you tip your doorman and other building staff around the holidays? Is it required? And if so, how much? Well, the holidays are upon us, and that is one of the most asked questions around this time of year. So we're giving you an updated 2024 holiday tipping guide, and stick around to the end of this video and I'm going to give you exactly on average how much you should consider tipping for each staff member of your building. But first, I need you to do me a favor, hit the like, subscribe, and notification button, and let's get started. So before we discuss exactly how much you should consider tipping per staff member in your building, we're going to address a few questions that always come up this time of year around tipping. And the first one is tipping required? The answer to that is no, tipping is not required, but the staff of your building does maintain your building and keep that building running fairly smoothly on a daily basis. And that is a very valuable service. Most staff members, whether you realize it or not, go beyond the call of duty and perform a lot of different services for members of your community. So you want to make sure that they feel appreciated, and the best way to do that is by tipping around the holidays. Now, a lot of people wonder, can you tip in other ways other than cash? Can you bring a nice bottle of wine, or can you bring some cookies or something like that? Any gift is always appreciated. Gifts are always nice, but honestly, until other vendors start taking cookies and bottles of wine as payments, such as paying off your student loans or helping your kid through college, then cash is always the way to go. The next question is usually, who should you tip? Well, buildings in New York City have various sizes of staff. Some buildings may have 3 or 4 doormen and multiple porters and multiple supers, whereas other buildings may just have 1 super. The general rule of thumb is whomever and however many people are employed directly by the building staff should receive some sort of a tip, and that tip amount is basically determined by the position they hold in the building. Now, at the end of this video, as I promised, we are going to discuss exactly how much you should consider tipping per staff position. But that is always usually the big question. How much should you tip? Certainly, I know that when I was first in New York City and I had very little money because I was young and I was just starting out, I had no idea what was going to be a good enough tip. The rule of thumb here is that you tip according to the level of service that you've received. So you may be, for example, a mom with 5 children, and you may always need help corralling those children and getting out the door with your stroller and that sort of thing. And that doorman is always there to help you, and maybe he even helps corral the children on your way out, or he calls you taxis or Ubers or that sort of thing. That is a very valuable service to a person living in that building, and that is worth an extra level of tipping. Perhaps this year you received a lot of packages, or maybe you had furniture delivered, and maybe that doorman or that super made an extra effort to be there when all of that was delivered and helped coordinate that. Again, that is a great service that is of benefit to you, so you should consider tipping a little bit more. Always look at the amount of services that you received. Did you require some extra services? And tip accordingly. Now, on the flip side, what if you didn't ask for any additional services this year, or you felt like you received very bad service throughout the year? Well, revenge tipping is never a good idea. Remember, your staff is, at the minimum, keeping your building, hopefully, running on a good, smooth level. So giving a tip, even if it is at the lower end of the range of tipping, is very much appreciated and recommended. And sometimes that little tip can go a long ways in helping you receive better service and additional services in the future. Now, what happens if you yourself had a difficult year financially because perhaps inflation is up and all of your costs are up across the board, or perhaps you are older and you went on a limited income this year, or unfortunately, perhaps you lost your job? If you can tip, certainly still do so. Most staff members who receive a lower tip from an individual than they have in previous years don't think, my God,
gosh, why are they not tipping me?
They usually think, wow, perhaps they've had a little bit of financial struggle just like me, or perhaps they're older and went on a limited income. They usually understand that there is a good reason for why you didn't tip more. You might want to be honest with them and say, hey, look, it was a rough year for me. I still appreciate your services. Here's what I can do. But certainly giving a reason is not necessary, but trying to tip, even if you've had a rough year, is certainly appreciated and usually understood. Now, here's a big question. If you are a renter, should you tip? Well, the answer to that is yes. Now, many renters think that the responsibility for tipping lies in the building management, and that is partly true. They should be rewarding their staff. But again, if you're living in a building where there is a doorman and maybe a super has done a really great job for you, those are still services that you have required that have benefited you personally, so you should consider tipping. As a renter, you may not want to tip as much as an owner in a building, but you should be tipping something. You should also consider if you're a renter in a regular rental building or if you're renting in a condo and a co-op building. If you're renting in a condo and a co-op building, then a little bit higher tip is expected and appreciated because it needs to match what the owners are usually paying. If you're living in a rental building, perhaps then that lower end tip is perfectly fine. But as a renter, you should always consider tipping something. Now, some buildings have what's called a tipping pool, and this means that all of the residents in the building get together and they just tip anonymously into a pool, and then that pool is divided up among all the staff members in the building in various ratios that are predetermined by the staff or by the management. Now, unfortunately, many times people use that as an excuse to tip less because it is anonymous and they think, well, the entire building is doing that. Even though it is designed to be anonymous and to provide equal service for everyone in the building, no matter how much they do or don't tip, make sure that you're personally tipping within the normal ranges and not using the tipping pool as an excuse just to tip less. Now, before we get to the amounts that you should consider tipping per staff member, a lot of people want to know, are tips tax deductible? For the average resident, the answer to that is no. However, if you are an investor or have an LLC that perhaps owns the apartment and you're tipping from a business perspective, then the answer is yes, but only up to $25 per staff member. Double check that with your accountant and make sure that in your case, your tips would be tax deductible. Okay, here's the moment you've been waiting for. I'm going to break down per staff member exactly how much you should consider tipping. I'm going to provide a range of tips. These are based on a wonderful resource called Brick Underground that does a poll every year and determines how much people are realistically tipping. We're going to talk about what that average range is, and we're going to talk about what the broad range is. All right, let's get started. Okay, for your super or resident manager, the average tip is between $150 and $300, with a broad range being between $100 and $500. For your doorman or concierge, the average in New York City is between $75 and $200, with a broad range being between $50 and $1,000. For your porters or handy people in the building, the average is between $25 and $50, with a broad range being between $25 and $100. Other maintenance staff in your building, the average is $25 to $50, with a broad range being between $25 and $100. And finally, if you do have a garage attendant, the average is between $25 and $50, with a broad range being between $25 and $100. So how much should you expect to spend total on tipping for the holidays for your building? Well, obviously that depends on how many staff members you do have in your building and the level of service that you receive. But let's assume that you have one of each of the staff members that we discussed. So on the low end, on the average, New Yorkers are tipping $300, and on the top end total, they're tipping around $675. Again, highly dependent on the amount amount of people that you have on staff in your building and also the level of service that you receive throughout the year. But it is always appreciated and highly recommended that you are generous around the holidays and tip as much as you can. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Happy holidays, happy tipping season, and we'll see you next time.